Okay, so I have my mom, my brother, and my sister, and my stepdad. Okay, hi. So imagine being a few days old and becoming queen at just 2 days old. Isn't that crazy? So Mary Queen of Scots was born in 1542, and after a few days old, her father passed away, and that left her Queen of Scotland. But not being fit to rule, her mom took over and became the regent, which the regent is basically someone in power but not technically the queen or king. So the King of England wanted Mary, Queen of Scots, to marry his son, but the Scots denied, and that made the King Henry IX want to start war to convince them eventually to marry. So after the war had started, they sought help from France, the Scots did, and that the King of France decided that if they wanted them to help, that she would have to marry his son, Francis. So after agreeing, they sent Mary, Queen of Scots, over to France for her education and to live there until she became of age to marry Francis. So with everything going on in that time period, people died very quickly, and most of the time of illness or sickness or diseases, and there really wasn't a medicine or cure for anything back then. So once Mary became of age of 15, the king decided that it was finally time for her and Francis to be married, because he feared that something may happen to where it would stop them from being married and stop the alliance. So shortly after, in 1558, King Francis, or the Dauphin Francis, and Queen Mary married and created a union. Shortly after that, a year later, they were said to be very madly in love and everything was going great. So a year later, after all the marriages has commenced throughout the year, they had a thing called a grand tournament. So with that, it's just kind of like duels and stuff like that. So it was coming near the end of that, and the King of France noticed that there was 2 lances left, which are long poles that basically you joust with. So he noticed there were 2 left, and he was like, well, why don't I do it? With that being said, he challenged some of the high-ranking officers, and all of them declined, but there was one he had his eyes on, and that was Montgomery. Montgomery declined, but the king was very adamant on it, so Montgomery decided to eventually, joust with him. So during the joust, Montgomery struck the king in the face area, and it caused a rupture. And so for the next 11 days after that, the king was very ill, he became very sick, and he eventually passed away. With that being said, that made the Dauphin, Francis, and Mary become king and queen. So Mary not only took over the role of Queen of France, but she also took over the Queen of Scotland. So her mom was no longer regent, and Mary was queen of not only 1, but 2 countries at the age of 16. So after the first year of marriage, the Dauphin, now King of France, he became very ill and sick and caught a disease in his ear. Soon after that, he passed away, and so Mary lost her rank, obviously, in France. So throughout the next year, she traveled around France mourning, and she soon became known as the White Queen. She became known as the White Queen because she was known for her beauty and her grace, and during that year she was mourning, she was very sad. So, alone and lost to everyone, after she's traveling across France, she decides she wants to return to Scotland. So, after deciding to return to Scotland, she still has yet to face her greatest enemy, which is Queen Elizabeth. In the 2009 book, Mary Queen of Scots, makers of history, Jacob states that King Henry, which was Queen Elizabeth's dad, King Henry IX, had many, many wives. And back then, that was very common and very not unusual. He had many wives, and they claimed most of them illegitimate because of how many he has had. One of those wives he had made Queen Elizabeth, and she took throne when King Henry passed away. So many of England denied that she was legitimate and declared that she was illegitimate and was trying to get that ruled. So if she was declared illegitimate, that would make Queen Mary of Scots become Queen of England. That made Queen Elizabeth despise Queen Mary and hate her. So after trying to return to Scotland, in 1561, Elizabeth tried to intercept and capture Mary, but ultimately failed. She resided in the palace of Holyroyd and named her brother James, half-brother James, her minister. So after residing for about 3 to 4 years in Edinburgh, she had many suitors and many people wanting to marry. She eventually ended up picking one, and it was Lord Darnley. They eventually got married, and she became with child. During that time period, he was very estranged, and many said that he was just crazy. So they believed that that he was just crazy. So after about a year in, she meets a Lord Bothwell, and they become very close. Many believe that they had relations during Lord Darnley and her's marriage. Soon after, all of a sudden, Lord Darnley passes away in a fire, but many found that he was strangled. So they believed Lord Bothwell was the one to do this, and they believed Mary was somewhat involved, but they couldn't figure it out. So 3 to 4 months after Lord Darnley's death, Lord Bothwell and Mary became married, and she eventually became with child, twins. But many believe that she had helped Lord Bothwell kill Lord Darnley, so many in Scotland began to hate her and try to kill her. So she sought Elizabeth for help, and Elizabeth kept her in captivity for about 19 years, and during that time, Mary had conspired to kill Elizabeth. So eventually, Elizabeth found out about that and decided that she would hang Mary, or not hang Mary, that she would execute Mary. So in 1587, Queen Elizabeth eventually executed Mary.